This program was made possible in part by the Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority. Also by a grant from the Alaska Center for Excellence in Journalism. And viewers like you. Gnostish Hawa, thank you.
So we're hoping to build, I think it's 14 kind of single room cabins. The homeless used to get on the bus and buy a ticket and ride around for hours if it was bad weather, but with COVID that was stopped. The library used to be a really great place for people to hang out for hours at a time or all day if they wanted. And with COVID, the library was closed for a while, cut the hours down. Some of those simple things that were really helping get people out of the weather and give them a little more normalcy in their life were taken away. What can people do? Contact local representatives, bring awareness to it, write letters to the editor, bake cookies for your homeless shelter so that they have something homemade to eat with their food. Buy people a muffin or a cup of hot cocoa and bring it to them as you're sitting on the street. Just little things like that. Don't make me cry.
My social life was strange and my life was irregular, and so I would kind of drink to numb it maybe, but I didn't really realize it was like a coping skill that I didn't really realize I was using to cope. And then I tore my rotator cuff and I was given an oxy prescription, and so I started taking those, and then before I knew it I was smoking those, and then I was smoking heroin, and then I was shooting heroin, and then the next many years is kind of a blur. It's harder here. It's absolutely harder here. It's more expensive to be addicted here, a lot more expensive. Like, the cost of heroin on the street here is about 10 times more expensive than it is in Seattle. And there are times in towns this small, maybe not so much Juneau, but definitely in Sitka, and probably in Juneau too, where there is no heroin or your drug of choice available, and so you have to tough it out.
Where do we find hope after a life has been broken? Where do we find new direction? And if we're going to provide services to people for the midterm, medium, or long term even, successfully, we have to be able to find them. They need the stability of an address. They need a telephone that functions more than a day or two at a time before it's stolen or lost. Those simple things can make a huge difference.
I mean, housing is kind of instrumental to just everything. So many of our community are being made homeless. And, we deal also with recidivism and people who are recently incarcerated. So, it all goes hand in hand. And when you can't get the housing you need, you're seeing so many of our people really just be homeless. We've seen it, right? Homelessness has ballooned up. And there's amazing programs and amazing people doing work, Housing First, Tlingit-Haida Regional Housing Authority. The problem is so much of it you can have housing, but if you don't have treatment, if you don't have counseling, you know, one has to go together.
Largely people that are like really, really addicted aren't housed. If you become addicted and you have housing, it's not unlikely that you will lose your housing because housing takes responsibility. And when you're addicted, it's the most important thing to you. You know, people say goodbye to their children because of addiction. People say goodbye to their jobs, and they say goodbye to their housing and everything else that's important to them, all of their relationships, everything. Because when you're addicted, it's a full-time job. You know, you're spending 24 hours a day, like, procuring this drug, getting the money to get it, or the means to steal it or something, and it's just this hamster wheel. You get, you use, you figure out how to get more, you use, and you know, sometimes in between you get ill because you don't have it, and there's no time for anything else. It takes like all of your bandwidth up.
The cost is immeasurable. How do you put a figure on anything that isn't? It's not like you're an addict for a minute, right? It's a lifetime. We have to build a system that is based on care and love and accountability.
When a person reaches a certain place in their addiction, that hope is lost. There needs to be an intervention of some kind for their sake that will help them to find a path. It's after that that the problem has been manifest. And there I think we need to focus on harm reduction.
Harm reduction is exactly what it sounds like, but reducing harm. So we give people harm reduction kits here at the Glory Hall, which is like a little baggie full of 10 clean syringes, alcohol prep pads, a tie-off, a cooker for drugs, and a couple other things, fentanyl test strips, so they can test their heroin for fentanyl before using, and we don't ask questions about, are you using in the building, or you know, we have safe needle disposals in all the bathrooms. We're expecting it to happen. It's controversial. A lot of people in the community don't like that we allow this, but our job is to meet homeless people where they are, and at this point in time, a lot of homeless people are addicted, and so in order to help the community that we need to serve, it's something we have to allow here, because if we didn't, all of these people would just be on the street and they'd be worse off for it.
So I'm hoping to get more shelves to put in here so we can keep stuff, and people collect stuff all over town. This is mainly just the showers and laundry, plus stuff, towels and sheets and sleeping bags inside that people have given me, shampoo and soap and things that people brought back from travel that they want me to have. Women, and right now men too, have access to the Sitkans Against Family Violence Shelter if they're in a situation where there's domestic violence or intimate partner violence, but there hasn't ever been a homeless shelter in Sitka. So we're at the top of Jarvis Street in Sitka. This is where we hope to build the cabin project. So right now we have a lot of, most of the people are couch surfing or sleeping in abandoned boats or sleeping in tents by our Indian River, which is a very high brown bear population area too, so another thing that people have to deal with, a safety issue. This stuff takes a lot of work. We'll have the cabins around here. We're gonna have walkways, maybe a community garden, a community room where there'll be a kitchen and some computers, and our project is based on the Housing First model to get people housing, get them a lock on their door, get them an address that they can use for a job application, for an apartment application, for any kind of, you know, come look me up somewhere. I'm in the 5th tent on the left by the river. Doesn't always work, but here people will have a building, people can come over and visit them. And if they want to work on finding a job, getting an education, getting their GED, fighting tobacco, alcohol, drug use, whatever, that then we have resources to help them. For some people, the addiction might cause them to lose their housing, their family, so that they become homeless. For some people that are homeless already, for whatever reason, they might get into an addiction problem because that's how they're surviving and dealing with their pain. So it's hard to know what comes first.
Nobody chooses to be an addict. I can promise you they don't feel good about themselves. No matter what they say, do, or try to perpetuate, inside they're really hurting, they're damaged, right? They're not happy with themselves, they know. So, blaming and accusing doesn't help. Accountability does. You have to hold people accountable, but I don't think you have to put them down. We certainly see it firsthand with our clients who are going through and struggling with housing. We know like Housing First is making a huge difference. We know that Clinton-Haida Regional Housing Authority makes a huge difference.
Juneau needs housing. Just because you're housed does not mean you're gonna get sober. But I think the likelihood of people achieving long-lasting recovery is so much better with housing. Like without housing, it's just not gonna happen. When you're homeless, you live in crisis and you're just as addicted to that crisis as you are the drug, and there's no exit because you'll get like Maslow's hierarchy of needs and housing is on the bottom. We need housing.
Maslow's pyramid is, according to my understanding, a theoretic basis for addressing the needs of individuals, starting with the most basic needs, as we usually see them, for shelter, for food, for security. And the pyramid is sort of a ziggurat up to the apex of spiritual development. And the needs must all be addressed, but without those most basic ones, all of the rest our social programs have a really hard time getting any traction at all.
That application process that's so necessary from a programmatic standpoint is such a barrier to some of our folks, right? I don't know if it's just phobia. It's not because they're not smart, but you hand somebody this big packet, this application, say you got to, it terrifies people, and more often than not, they never even fill it out. They're just like, not going to bother. I'm not going to qualify. Because I think they see all that paperwork as one red flag after another, and then people just get really angry and resentful towards the organization because they feel like they're failing them. And so I think we need to really educate people on what those opportunities are.
I would say that we are connectors. We connect people to social resources. Applying for Medicaid, food stamps.
Helping them connect to services in our town that assist them with housing.
Helping them get identification for when they do get housing, which would include social security card, license, or ID.
They don't do well with lengthy applications. That is where a lot of times we step in and assist, because it is asking questions and asking them to remember months of information or previous rentals, and you have to remember that these people are going through a lot and they're like down on their luck, not living in the best times. Like they can barely remember what they did a week ago. They're not going to remember the last time or who they rented from.
Let her know if they were still gonna.
You feel like you're doing so much, or you're trying to do so much to help people and better their situation, and not to make yourself feel better, but because that's just our job. But we're limited with the resources we have or lack thereof.
So the first thing that we do is help them apply for a Section 8 voucher. If you're one person, that covers $1,125. One bedroom apartments in Juneau are going for $1,450, $1,500. So that right there, what if they are low income and they have a Section 8 voucher, there's literally nowhere for them to go.
When you look at the numbers of the amount of contacts we have with people that are homeless or, people who have drug and alcohol issues and whatnot, and the numbers of people that we've been able to aid and assist with being able to get off the streets and get into housing and stuff like that, they don't add up. It's few and far in between.
To those who have never been here, Alaska is an exciting and adventurous last frontier of the mind. But to Alaskans, the idea that Alaska is a wilderness where fortunes can be easily made is a myth.
It's difficult for everyone. I mean, there's people who are working 2 jobs that can't afford a house. We work with everyone who's basically not in the highest tier of income in Juneau. People just get to town and they didn't know how bad it was, and they hear that we help with housing, and we try the best that we can, but it still takes 3-4 months, even if they have a good high-paying job.
Forest Service employees who transfer there. In general, the smaller the community, the more scarce and higher priced the housing. Rentals are difficult, if not impossible, to find in small villages. Trailer spaces may be hard to find. And while some government housing is available, it's also scarce.
AHFC, as it's commonly referred to as Alaska Housing Finance Corporation, and they're ultimately the deciding factors in who provide the housing vouchers to these individuals that are applying to get out of homelessness. And they are the ones that are currently responsible for the amounts that these vouchers are given, which aren't of much help. Somebody who is applied and then maybe been approved 8 months later, 9 months later, is told, here's your approval letter for an amount that is going to get you nowhere. So the system is broken in the sense of you're going to have someone fill out a 5-page application, but then you're not even going to give them a response for 6 to 8 to 10 months. The process and time that things take for things to be reviewed and given approval or an answer, even if it's a no, you're waiting months till you find that out. Then if you are approved, say with Alaska Housing Vouchers, you only have so much time to respond. And then these people get their mail at the homeless shelter and they're not staying there every day because they might go from camping to staying there. So then by the time they check their mail there, they ran out of time to respond to the assistance letter that was sent to them. So then it becomes a matter of making a call and being on hold for hours at a time, or in some cases having to reapply and start the process all over.
The state of Alaska provides a limited number of relatively low-interest housing loans to assist residents and newcomers.
Section 8 or housing choice vouchers, something that HUD moved to a number of decades ago, and it was a transition away from building public housing. And if you think about some of the projects, as they were called in Chicago or New York, huge 50-story buildings, there was a real stigma with families growing up in the projects. And I think that HUD wisely wanted to try to take the stigma away from families, from children, and they developed a voucher program where instead of going into a public housing unit, you would receive a voucher that you would pay approximately 30% of your income, no matter how high or low that was, with the federal government paying the rest of it. You could take it to any landlord that would accept it. So you would have a voucher holder living in a fourplex with 3 other people that weren't receiving public assistance. So hopefully, eliminating the stigma because you were having more of a mixed housing situation. It was also getting the money into the private sector.
It's a market issue. There is open places in our town, in our city, and people are charging what they're charging because it's become a competitive game now. It's unfortunate that some people, greed plays a factor. There's vacant houses, apartments, condos that are not for sale, they're for rent, but it's being controlled by the individual owners, and that has, that's just what they choose and are able to do because they're, it's ownership. And that has nothing to do with government or city, that's just how it is.
Obviously, when there's a tighter rental market, it's much harder to find an apartment. And so that's the biggest concern with us, is that a softer market, easier to find a landlord, and it gets more difficult for everybody to find an apartment, not just specifically somebody that has a voucher. We've been digging, in particular the last year, to try to determine why everything is so tight, whether it's going to remain tight, what role do Airbnbs play? And so there's a number of variables out there that we're trying to figure out to determine what really the housing need is and how that's going to benefit the folks that have our vouchers.
The price that the individuals qualify for doesn't match up with the amount that's being charged for rentals in our town. So from that side of things, yes, it's a government problem.
We have something called a payment standard, and this is what we're allowed to pay for any given unit. So, just because a landlord wants $3,000 for a one-bedroom unit, we're not legally allowed to pay that much.
We look at the HUD recommendations, and then we look at the communities. I mean, if we're giving vouchers out in a community and nobody's able to find an apartment for that amount of money, we know that we're too low. So we're constantly looking to make sure that we are having it at a level where we're not being taken advantage of by landlords, but that we're providing enough funds that people will be able to move into to apartments.
Currently, I would think Juneau is definitely unstable. Since the Glory Hall reopened, they have continuously been over capacity with individuals staying there. You see people who they know what crimes come with what repercussions, and they will commit crimes with the end result being them being able to go to jail, knowing that they're gonna have a warm place to stay and a meal provided, 3 meals provided to them, at that, because that's an alternative situation to their homeless living. And it's a way to be off the street.
When you're unhoused and you're addicted, it's pretty much impossible to get clean, because the opportunity to get clean only comes around when you're not in crisis or desperate, and getting clean feels like you're in crisis and like you're desperate in and of itself. And so when you're also unhoused, like, there is no opportunity to get clean. There's no place to go and sleep it off for the weekend or two that you need to do that. You feel like you have no dignity. People look at you a certain way. People treat you a certain way. You have to do certain things to get by, addicted or not.
The threat to our whole existence is profound. And the way that we address that most profoundly and most effectively is right here at arm's length. How we treat each other, how we talk to one another, how we make efforts not to enclose ourselves within the walls of the institutions or the neighborhoods or the gated communities that we live in, but to reach out a little bit, just where we can.
A lot of people that have been privileged enough to be housed their entire lives and never had to worry about losing their housing in any way, and have no understanding of this, if you put them on the street, and in this community of people that live on the street, in a week, a lot of people would be using hard drugs. When there's nothing better on the horizon, how do you pass your time? How do you get through the cold night, Or how do you stay awake because things are not safe? These drugs are a survival skill in a lot of ways. The solution is not to get online and bitch about it. The solution is to think of something for these people. And the pull yourself up by your bootstraps notion is like good to a certain point, because people have to participate in their own healing or their own recovery, but it's too great a task for someone who's like sleeping in a doorway to do 100% on their own. They need the help of our community, and that includes, you know, everyone's positive, unconditional positive regard.
You know, I think as a society, what we really have to do is remove some of the stigmas around addiction, around homelessness, and remember these are humans. I think it's that simple. They're not bad people. They're our people, they're us. When I look at somebody like that, I see myself, because I've been there. And some of us haven't been there, so it's a little harder to put that lens on and see them. But I think even if you haven't suffered with addiction, just put some care and humanity into how you see people, how you treat them, and how you work with them, and it'll be the change. You know, we have to humanize this work and the people we're serving. You know, the minute you think you're better than them or they're less than, you're already not going to make a difference for them.
This program was made possible in part by the Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority. Also by a grant from the Alaska Center for Excellence in Journalism. And viewers like you. Gnostish Hawa. Thank you.